Hello everybody, welcome to the Premier Injuries Deadline roundup of all the injury news. Before we get into it, as always, Ben, how are you doing today? Friday's usually absolutely manic for you, isn't it?
Absolutely, mate. Frazzled. Early FPL deadline does not help. We've had the usual glut of press conferences between that 1 and 2. Obviously, a lot of FPL managers waiting on news on Mitrovic and Reece James. Those have been the standouts. So it's been pretty hectic. Caveat again, just a reminder if anybody hasn't seen before, we will have the FF Hub predicted lineups article on screen, but it isn't fully up to date because I've literally just left the press conferences within the last few seconds. So those will be updated ahead of the FPL deadline. But for now, they're somewhere in the region, somewhere between maybe Wednesdays and Thursdays updates, depending on which teams we are.
Yeah, and the situation as well, we always direct people, as I've got up on screen here, the Premier Injuries website. So, we will broadcast here. If there's any kind of breaking news as well, we always kind of release it on there or on your Twitter as well, Ben. But yeah, so I guess, a few people have said we're a little bit late. It's my fault, tech problems, took forever for the computer to kind of load it up. But I guess maybe we'll go through alphabetically as usual, but with the headliners there, I mean, is there a lot of breaking news for people to anticipate? Because like you said there, we're looking at the likes of Mitrovic, Reece James. It's been a busy week for you, hasn't it?
As always, fixtures are coming thick and fast. European, we have another full slate next week, midweek as well. So there's going to be difficulty in getting these predicted lineups nailed down. There will be a lot of rotation, I suspect, this weekend, and then again Tuesday, Wednesday, and then also into game week 13. So that's going to be difficult to predict. And of course, the more minutes, the greater exposure these players get, the more opportunity they have of picking up injuries. And we've seen that this week with those European games.
So let's start off alphabetically as we always go. So people will go through the teams, and then if you have player specific questions, if we've missed anybody out, please do message us below, or as we're on a certain team, you might have even more questions about certain things. But let's start off with Bournemouth. They've been in fairly good form recently, haven't they, Ben? Quite tight at the back, a few clean sheets. And yeah, what is the situation there?
Yeah, I'm not going to dwell on Bournemouth for too long, in all honesty. Ben Pearson, Joe Rothwell, they have been training for the past couple of weeks. And whether they can break into Gary O'Neill's squad remains to be seen, but they're working well. David Brooks' hamstring problem, that's going to keep him sidelined. And also Lloyd Kelly, that's an ankle injury for him. One player that wasn't mentioned, Junior Stanislas, that's been an adductor issue in recent weeks. He wasn't confirmed as being an absentee, so he may make the matchday squad, but his involvement has been minimal this season.
So let's turn our attention from Bournemouth to Arsenal. And they've been in fabulous form at the moment. As an Arsenal fan, people can see in the background, I'm on a high. I think we're playing so well. We've got a nice game against Leeds as well. But is there any kind of changes to the team there? Looks like you've got Tomiyasu as left back. Yeah, are you keeping that? Is that one that you're going to change at all?
Yeah, I mean, the two sort of main talking points of the Arsenal team heading into this weekend would be, you've touched upon it, Takahiro Tomiyasu. He was a surprise inclusion at left back last weekend against Liverpool. That was the absence of Zinchenko, who's struggling to overcome that calf problem. Many would have thought maybe Kieran Tierney would have had that spot nailed down in the absence of Zinchenko, but he played 90 minutes in the Europa League on Thursday evening. So that to me suggests that Tomiyasu is going to retain his place. The other big talking point this weekend has been around Gabriel Jesus. He wasn't involved on Thursday night. However, that was just a precautionary measure. There's nothing in terms of a concussion, no protocol to sit out. It's just been a busy few weeks. So Mikel Arteta was protecting the Brazilian, and he should return fully refreshed on Sunday.
And just for a lot of FPL managers, Zinchenko was one of their favourite assets at the start of the season. He had an electric start. He scored. He assisted. He was playing so well. What is the situation there? Because it looks like potentially it's got a bit more serious, his injury?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was one that we initially expected to be around that sort of 14 to maybe 21-day mark. He still hasn't been involved in full training, to my knowledge. That may have happened today. We haven't had any updates on Thursday, but up until that Europa League game, he was out of contention. And like I say, the difficulty that we always have when we're games are maybe being played on a Sunday, decisions aren't normally taken until after that final session. So in theory, Zinchenko could have trained today and may be involved in training on Saturday as well. Doesn't help a lot with the FPL deadline. As soon as I come off this stream, I will be looking to try and sort of fathom out exactly where we are. But for this moment in time, like I say, I think Tomiyasu has that left back berth to his own. And even as Zinchenko is fully fit, given his injury problems, given the amount of time that he's missed, it may be best that he keeps a place on the bench.
Yeah, and just to remind people, it is that early deadline. I'm sure people know very well, but don't want anybody to kind of miss out. And this is how we usually play the game as well, don't we, Ben? We leave it to the last minute because of this kind of breaking injury news. But we're going to turn our attentions to the villains, Aston Villa. Some people have a little bit of interest in them, but what is the situation there? Is there anybody coming back into the side? And I think the big thing is you've got Buendia starting, which tactically I agree with, but will Gerrard agree with you?
That's the big question. I'm not actually sure what Danny Ings has done to upset Steven Gerrard and what Philippe Coutinho is doing to remain, one of the manager's favourites within that Aston Villa starting 11. Hasn't been pulling up any trees. Certainly looks a pale shadow of the player that we've seen at Liverpool. For me, patience has run dry. He's been very, very poor. I think, Villa looking for goals, they need Danny Ings back in that starting 11. I think for the last 2 weeks, I've predicted he starts with Coutinho out. If it doesn't happen this week, then I'm lost. But Villa need a result. The pressure is beginning to mount on Steven Gerrard. Elsewhere within the squad, a couple of little updates. Matty Cash, he's been struggling with a hamstring injury that kept him out over the international break. He's fine, but he was removed from the session on Thursday, again, just as a precaution, just to protect that hamstring. And also Lucas Digne, he was injured with the national team in France. There was a little bit of confusion, or should I say uncertainty, with regards to his ongoing heel issue. Now, Steven Gerrard is hopeful and believes that the Frenchman could be back in contention before the end of the month.
Excellent, as always, Ben. Just fascinating to keep up with this. Brentford, the Bees, not been on good form in the last couple of game weeks. We haven't seen too many goals from Tony, but the team looks pretty much unchanged. Is anybody kind of coming back into the squad to buffer it? Because I think, especially at the back, they've had more problems than usual.
Yeah, the big talking point from last weekend was the inclusion of Ethan Pinnock. He hadn't played a competitive game since April. That was knee and hamstring problems that kept him sidelined. He was thrown straight back in there at St James's Park, scored an own goal. He was at fault for another goal and had an all-round nightmare performance, if the truth be told. Not just him, but the team generally. Thomas Frank said that one hurt for the first 24 hours, so that was a big result. They'll be looking to bounce back. It remains to be seen whether, Pinnock keeps his place or Matthias Jorgensen, who is another option, could come in. Elsewhere, we've seen Damsgaard sort of flirting with starts and minutes. Again, he is up to speed in terms of his fitness, which was the issue when he first arrived. But I still think there's that period of adaptation and, finding his feet within the Premier League. So I have Janelt returning in the centre of the park.
And just quickly going back to Aston Villa, Andrew Williams has asked, might Bailey be back for game week 12?
He has trained. So he is in contention and he is available for Steven Gerrard first and foremost. However, we talk about players who literally haven't impressed, and I kind of get away with Leon Bailey. We talked about it last season when he made that cameo, scored a couple of great goals, but then went off with the injury, and he struggled in the latter part of last season. This year, I think we watched him against Southampton. He was poor. His final pass was shocking. So for me, does he push into that starting 11? Like I say, I think Danny Ings deserves a chance because the players who've been in before him certainly haven't done anything to justify their place in the starting 11. So in contention, available for me, probably starts on the bench, but look, I'm struggling to nail down this Villa starting 11 week in and week out, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think the Villa's logic, it's not logical. Some of the tactics there, I wouldn't be playing a lot of those players. But Gerrard is the manager, so we'll see what happens with that situation. Now, you covered Brentford, but their opponents this weekend are Brighton. I've been fairly impressed with the Brighton team under new manager De Zerbi. But what is the injury information there? Are they going to be fielding their best 11 once again?
I do fancy the Seagulls to be unchanged, but of course, like I say, with this full slate of fixtures midweek, managers may look to either prioritise this fixture or the next one, so that can determine, how they line up. For me, I've went with an unchanged setup from the defeat to Tottenham. They were a little bit unfortunate. It's the same team that went to Anfield and drew 3s each as well. With regards to injuries, nothing major in that treatment room. Unfortunately, we heard earlier in the week that Enoch Mwepu has been forced to retire due to that hereditary heart condition that was flagged up while he was on international duty. So, he's been relieved of his duties with the squad, and we wish him well for the future. But elsewhere, Jakob Mola, he's the only one really long-term serious, maybe targeting early 2023, possibly March.
Now, I just want to interrupt before we get on to Chelsea. Because of the fact that we do have 5 subs in the Premier League this season, do you think that it's going to be a lot of in-game kind of rotation as well? So maybe defenders or certain players won't see out the games. I mean, is this something that you're considering in your FPL tactics as well? Players that are kind of the ones that will be nailed for the 90 minutes, because we love those deep state players who can score the last minute goals when defenders are fatigued or they can just get involved there.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I mean, there's going to be a lot of second guessing, a lot of luck between now and this winter break, the World Cup in Qatar. It's unprecedented. We had an additional 4 Premier League fixtures shoehorned in over the same period of time between, game week 1 and I think what would be game week 16. Factor in those additional European fixtures, which is another 2 Champions League games. And then you begin to see why managers are a little bit concerned. So those squads that are blessed with maybe a little bit more strength and depth can afford a little bit rotation. And then also as well, other influencing factors you need to consider with regards to, try to pick those high status, high profile players who inherently stay fit and play those 90 minutes. But, just to try and mitigate that risk down the line, make sure you build a nice strong bench so you do have, playing subs coming off if needed.
So let's turn our attention to the Blues of Chelsea. You're keeping Kepa between the sticks, and also we do have to talk about the big injury news there with Reece James. So yeah, Ben, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with the goalkeeper choice or where else in the team?
Yeah, I'll start with Kepa. I was lucky enough to have him in the starting 11, and a lot of people had been voicing or certainly championing the cause of Edouard Mendy for a return. That was a knee injury that he's overcome, and that's absolutely fine with regards to that. But, I did say that a new manager with new ideas, new philosophies, and Kepa has performed well under Graham Potter, and therefore for me it's his jersey to lose. So that's the reason why I'm keeping faith in Kepa for now. With regards to Reece James, that injury in the Champions League didn't look to be too serious initially, and in fact those assessments and evaluation basically said as much. However, he was sent for an MRI scan. Further evaluations now reveal that it could be potentially worse than first feared. Now, he has a specialist consultant appointment due for this weekend. Graham Potter, quite rightly was quite coy. Didn't want to say too much in case, like I say, just in case he's given out the wrong information. But, based on that, there is some suggestion that one, he could potentially need surgery, and an initial timeline of around about 6 to 8 weeks has maybe been called, and that, would question his availability for the World Cup.
It's dreadfully sad news then. So, with that situation there, we might cover replacements for him and situations like that. But, with that timeline as well, with the World Cup, I guess, does that totally rule him out if he does go under the knife? I mean, is there any chance, because quite often we say, the return to training, the return from injury does not always equal a return to form and that ability to perform at the top level.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, just to stress, he does have that specialist appointment. So this 6 to 8 week timeline is just a rough guide on potentially what may happen. Surgery could impact on that. But if that's true, and we're looking at something in and around that, then I would suggest that, it would be a big risk for Gareth Southgate to rely on somebody like Reece James. You don't want to be going into one of the world's biggest stages and performing for England at the highest level on the back of no domestic minutes, which potentially up to 2 months. So for me, that probably puts Kieran Trippier in pole position for that right back spot. We know that Trent is out of favour with Gareth, so it could be that the Newcastle fullback is off to Qatar in the summer.
I mean, it's the right back conundrum, as many have said, with Gareth Southgate, has solved itself in very unfortunate circumstances. So Crystal Palace, I think they've got one of the best games this weekend. We've said it many, many times, Ben. Leicester are just pretty damn dreadful. But is there any concerns over the big players in that team? They've looked really good at certain times this season, a good attack, but then players have come in and out. I think the team don't look as good when Anderson is not in the side. So yeah, is it a strong Crystal Palace team this weekend?
Yeah, we're pretty much as you were, certainly in terms of those key players. So there's no fresh injuries, although Will Hughes is expected to miss out after picking up an illness. There was a surprise at left back last time out. Jeffrey Sloop was preferred over Tyreek Mitchell. Maybe that was more of a tactical switch, but we have Mitchell back in that team. And like I say, we're fairly confident that Palace can go there and at least score a goal.
Yeah, and you think that Edouard will keep his place as well, because, the kind of discussion each weekend is Edouard Mateta. It's one of the problems why FPL managers haven't been able to kind of nail down a Crystal Palace forward.
Yeah, I mean, I am sticking with Edouard. He's playing some, decent football. He's got himself a couple of goals. He deserves that run in the team, and especially when you're a centre forward, you're a striker, you're thriving on confidence, you're a confidence player. If you're scoring, you need to be in. I think if Edouard does start this weekend, however, it wouldn't be surprised if Patrick Vieira swaps that over for Mateta, again, just because of that quick turnaround midweek.
So attention on the Toffees, and this is a team that you actually think have done quite well defensively this season. They're against Tottenham at the weekend, but is there any injury news that could scupper their fairly decent efforts at shoring up what was a leaky back line?
Yeah, I mean, they are overperforming. Let's not make no bones about it. And as much as I hate to say, and yeah, it pains me to say, Jordan Pickford, he's been okay. He's ex-Sunderland, so I don't want to big him up too much. But, the introduction of Connor Cody certainly helps as well. Seamus Coleman coming in for Nathan Patterson, although he had a great season. And they're doing okay with regards to injuries. Dominic Calvert-Lewin still isn't taking part in full sessions. And Frank Lampard won't consider him until he gets back to somewhere close to optimum level. So that's why we have Mupai on the right. Dwight McNeil, I expect to come in for Anthony Gordon, who is serving a one-match ban.
Now, another one that has garnered a lot of tension for this game week is Mitrovic. Is he injured, Ben?
No. In the true sense of the word, no. Will he be included on Saturday? That remains to be seen. This is one that we literally just have heard from, so that's why it hasn't really been updated. So the facts as we understand them, as we know it, Mitrovic has been taking part in the warm-up, rejoined the team for the first time on Friday. That's almost 2 weeks out. We know he picked up that foot problem on international duty. He was patched up. He went out to face his former employers, Newcastle, picked up another knock, and then has done very little in terms of work since then. So it doesn't sound great. Like I say, he's been out on the training pitches and he has done some of the part session with the group. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he has been cleared and he will be available. Marco Silva and his team will want to check for any kind of reaction or a response, make sure that's okay. If he has been cleared, then I suspect he will be included on the bench. So this team news will be updated. And like I say, I do expect Mitrovic, if past fit, to maybe be on the bench just because he hasn't had that number of minutes on the training pitches over the last fortnight.
And I guess as well with the tight fixture schedule as well, they'll want to manage those minutes. Do you reckon it will be a managed minutes over the next couple of game weeks? I mean, is that something that you'd be concerned about?
Let's see, really, as well. It depends on how is Vicenas. I have absolutely butchered that name, by the way. His replacement last week. Vicinius. Yes, you'll pop it in the comments. I'm sure you all will and tell us how bad that absolutely done that. But you know what? If he comes in and they get a result and Fulham arrest, you know, this recent slide of back-to-back results, then that eases the pressure and the burden on Marco Silva to throw Alexander Mitrovic back in there. But if they were to get beat again, pressure's beginning to mount. And then, you know, there are other conversations and decisions to be had because this is a results-based business. And, you know, Marco Silva will be feeling that pressure despite a great start if they get beat again.
Now, we've already mentioned their opponents this weekend, Arsenal, but Leeds are taking on the Gunners. They will be at home, but people don't really fancy them too much. But there is some interest in some of their assets. They've had all right underlying data in some aspects, but is there injury news to kind of buoy the team? Because we've seen Bamford kind of come back into the team, Rodrigo as well. They should be having one of their best 11s out there, apart from Sinistera, who is obviously still banned.
No, Sinistera is back. He returns. That was just a one-match ban.
Apologies.
Two cautionable offences. So he will come back in contention. But I don't really see him displacing Harrison. You know, he struggled to get in to that starting 11 before those injuries to Rodrigo. So I'm thinking that Jess March will more or less stick with that same starting 11. But again, like I say, if he's not involved from the start this weekend, he is a player that could come in for Jess Marsh's team. And also that right back Worth, I've been toying with Christensen and also Luke Ayling. But Christensen, he offers a lot more going forward. Maybe lacks a little bit defensively what Ayling has. So again, we may see as the season goes on, Jess March sort of flip-flopping between those two players on a, you know, based on opposition and tactically. You know, once Luke Ayling is fully back up to speed following that knee surgery early in the summer.
The Foxes are up next. Leicester, again, we don't need to repeat the points that we're not big fans of them at the moment. But I think one of the interesting ones is Castagne. He had what looked to be a nasty head injury or potential head injury there at the weekend. Is he going to be back in the squad?
Yeah, badly bruised eye. So that was just more of a precautionary measure, nothing too serious. So I fully expect Castagna to be okay. Other talking points, Johnny Evans. He's managing a slight calf issue. Now, if he was to miss out, then it remains to be seen who Brendan Rodgers calls upon. He said that we do have players available. Yannick Vestergaard is one of those, although he hasn't been involved in any Premier League squad this season. In fact, only played for the under-21s earlier this week, scored an own goal, and they were beaten 7-0 at home to Fulham. So, yeah, make of that what you will. Also, Soyuncu, you know, he hasn't had much of a look in, but again, Brendan Rodgers said he bases his picks on the squad, you know, on how these players perform in training. The other conundrum we have at the moment is the Padson Daka or the Jamie Vardy. I still don't see why Jamie Vardy isn't getting more starts. I know he's not seen as the future, but still, he's got a lot to bring. But again, if Vardy was to start this weekend, then I think it would be Padson Daka midweek and maybe vice versa.
Interesting. We have had information on how to pronounce Vinicius. So Benny
Nissus.
Benny has sent a message, and so has Yaya Crew. He says, Vinny, see us.
Vinicius.
Yes.
I said that, man. I said that. That's exactly how I pronounced it.
Yeah.
Vinicius.
Yeah.
Vinicius.
Yeah. I'm appalled that they'd question you, Ben.
It's obviously a problem with the mic.
Yeah.
Or their speaker setup, or
Yeah,
It's Vinicius.
yeah. I heard you say that.
Yeah.
Loud and clear, Let's move on to Liverpool. I think we can say all their names pretty well. Big inclusion here this weekend is the return of Robertson and no Trent Alexander-Arnold. So a bit of a different defence. Will it reap better results? We don't know. It's against Manchester City. But yeah, what has made you decide that Robertson's back in? Because how long has he been out for now?
Around about 4 weeks. So yes, it is a little bit of a gamble. Had minimal minutes at Ibrox. Yes, it is a gamble, and I'm not 100% locked in. I'm maybe looking back with rose-tinted glasses and thinking, Robertson is the first choice. He is a better player, but it's the decision with regards to, does Jurgen Klopp feel that he's fit enough, sharp enough to come into a game like this, or does he have the belief that Tsimikas can deliver when he has Robertson on the bench? So that's a conundrum that I'm in. Trent, we know, picked up that ankle problem, not as serious as we first thought. There was a theory that he could maybe recover, only a small outside chance. So I'm playing the percentages here and the fact that we probably will miss out, maybe around about a 10 to 14 day injury. But like I say, there is an outside chance. Kanate for Matip, who was injured, and also no Henderson. The decision when I picked this team was before that Rangers game. That was based primarily on the fact that he had been carrying that hamstring issue, and just those consecutive games could have aggravated that. But with everything else that's going on as well, with regards to his coming together or verbal altercation with Gabriel, then I brought Fabinho back in to sit alongside Thiago.
Now, formerly, that game, Liverpool-Man City, was top of the table clash. It was title contenders. It was all about the narratives there. But there's a big disparity between the two. Manchester City look really, really good. But is there any injury news that may upset their efforts against Liverpool?
Absolutely not. We're pretty much as you were. John Stones is probably the closest of those currently sidelined to a return, maybe 7 to 10 days, possibly 2 weeks. We have heard Pep say this before, but they're well stocked in that backline in terms of central defenders. We have had problems in recent times on exactly who it is that he'll start. We've seen Diaz dropped to the bench, but again, that just comes about managing minutes. So we've went with this one. I've went with Akanji covering on the right hand side, and Cancelo on the left. Of course, he could bring in Gomez and put Cancelo on the opposite flank. Also, I've included Mahrez. A little bit unfortunate midweek. He was taken off early doors following the sending off of Gomez, so he only had a few minutes in the bank there, and that's why we have him starting.
We have had a message from Josh Coe. Really good analysis here, if you agree with it. No Henderson advantage to Liverpool.
Look, let's just say he certainly isn't hitting the heights that he once was. And, I like the Thiago and Fabinho, even the Harvey Elliott. I think Jurgen Klopp will go with that 4-2-3-1 as opposed to the 4-3-3, which they were getting found out and it become pretty predictable. And for that reason, those two holding midfielders, that's why I see Thiago and Fabinho as the two better options. And if you've got to pick two from three, then Henderson's a player to make way.
Yaya Crew has said, is Gundogan injured?
Gundogan is not injured, no, but again, we're talking about a squad rotation, squad management, games midweek. So there's lots going on again. We've just heard from Pep Guardiola, so I will be going over these. And like I say, if they feel a need, any tweaks from any late headline news. But as we know with Pep, there's no Grealish in there as well. It could quite easily be, 4 or 5 changes from that starting 11 because they're just that good.
The other side of Manchester, the red side of Manchester, what's the team news there that people need to be aware of, Ben?
What we're looking at, I've brought Rafael Varane back into that starting 11, and maybe Victor Lindelof could feel a little bit aggrieved at that decision. he has started. Again, I based it on the fact that he played 90 minutes in Europa, and Varane had been doing so well before he picked up that ankle injury, or that ghost injury maybe in that derby. It was probably just a good excuse to get away from Erling Haaland. In fact, on the day, Casemiro starting in the absence of Scott McTominay, who was suspended. I was a little surprised to see him start against Omnia. I thought Erik ten Hag would have kept him fresh. Anthony Martial, he will be a late decision. Even if past fit, I still think Rashford leads the line there, and I think maybe a place on the bench given his recent injury problems.
Josh Coe has asked, with the rotation situation, is Scott Carson set to have a start?
Probably not. Ever. That's great for, there's one thing, if you look at a Pep lineup and you want a shoe-in, a player that is nailed, barring injury, illness, or suspension, all day, every day, Edison will start.
Right. So let's turn our attention to Newcastle. Imagine this will be clipped, won't it? It will just become like viral.
Yeah. This is my Rory Jennings moment.
Yeah. I don't think it could be as bad as the Haaland moment. Never. So with the Newcastle team, they're your boys, played absolutely brilliantly recently in the last 4 game weeks. Probably the best attack in the Premier League in terms of underlying data, XG. Nobody else comes close to you guys. Mainly because of how good Wilson has played. With his injury history, are you worried this game week? So maybe not game week 11, but maybe game week 12. Could there be a bit of rotation just to manage his minutes?
That's always a big question, is who do you actually rotate Callum Wilson for? I certainly see Callum Wilson as a starter, and then, hopefully we've got the job done nice and early around about that 60, 65 minute mark. And then you bring Wilson off to protect him, with one eye on the next game. Of course, you've got Alan Saint-Maxim potentially on the bench, who has played centrally in recent times, but Alexander Isak still isn't there in terms of being in full fitness. So, I think it's got to be Callum Wilson. In all honesty, I've got the Magpies unchanged for the 3rd game running. That'll mean the likes of Joe Linton will have to sit this one out. But how can you really look to change that team on the back of a 5-1 win at Craven Cottage? Was it 4-1 Craven Cottage and then 5-1 against the Bees last weekend? So yeah, as much as I would like to change things up, I think it's difficult, and that's why Dan Burn keeps his place ahead of Matty Targett as well.
Senin has asked the question, Ten Hag subbed Ronaldo over Sancho on when Martial was injured versus Everton. Do you really think that Ronaldo will be dropped?
Yes. Is that as insightful as you want? I mean, look, again, it's a difficult call. He's knocking on the door. He got his 700th career goal. His quality is undoubted. The issues tend to be more off the field with regards to maybe a little bit of unrest in the changing rooms. He had been one of those players heavily linked with a move away at the summer, and one of those players that everybody said that Erik ten Hag would get rid of. He isn't. He's still here now. Whether that's because of financially teams were priced out of any move or otherwise, he's still there. Do I think he starts as a regular? I don't think he does. I think his future at the club is merely as a bit part player when everybody else is fit and available.
I think as well, to kind of add to your analysis, I don't think Ronaldo's the long-term option. Ten Hag doesn't really want to play with him in the team because he wants the team to adapt to his ideology, to his tactics. And Ronaldo, he's a brilliant player, but he doesn't play the Ten Hag style, and he leaves, due to the way that he plays, one man off the field in terms of the build-up play. The new modern managers, Pep, Arsenal with Arteta, Jurgen Klopp, it's all about every player on the team kind of being involved with that build-up play, and Ronaldo doesn't offer that. So I think as well, tactically, somebody who maybe has a bit more work rate in them. Not that Ronaldo's lazy or anything, he's older, he paces himself, and I think that's where maybe you're correct as well, that the tactics of Ten Hag will see him kind of drop out from the side. Let's turn our attention to Nottingham Forest, though. We did see a switch at the right-back position there. A lot of people have Nico Williams in their team, but Aurier made it into the starting 11. Is that going to continue?
I mean, the only worry with Aurier is his, again, lack of fitness and sharpness. He was a late signing. I think he was a free agent signing actually outside of the window. So he's taken a little bit of time to get up to pace or Premier League ready, as it were. Forest picked up their first point of the season since game week 3. I think it was against Aston Villa. So for that reason, I think Steve Cooper sticks with that same starting 11, which is why we don't have Nico Williams in the team.
I'm surprised they've not run out of shirt numbers, for Aurier, like, 99+1 or something on the back of the shirt there. Absolutely amazing the amount of players that they signed. And Senin says, thank you very much to both of us. So Slavcho has asked, great content throughout the week. Do you think Haaland has an issue or has he just been rested?
I mean, Pep came out and he said, I think he referenced the fact that he was feeling heavily fatigued. He had so tired. So he was named on the bench against Copenhagen, and of course he was unused. So that was more of just a bit of player management. And again, with those fixtures coming up, it could be that, Haaland is maybe replaced in around that 60 or 70 minute mark if City have that game in the bag. But, they're always going to be wary of Erling Haaland. One, he's coming into a brand new league, brand new environment. It's a different intensity. It's a different pace. He's maybe asked to do a different role. And, you're aware of those injury problems that, from his days with Dortmund. So, you're going to want to protect him for that. Now, where will Pep's priorities lie? He maybe, not publicly, he may not come out and say it, but I think it's Champions League. Certainly, he needs to get that European Cup under his belt. And it may be, the Premier League that may suffer in terms of his minutes at some point. But like I say, it was just more good management from Pep, given everything that's, the fanfare that's surrounded Haaland, since his arrival in the Premier League.
I guess as well, the positive with Haaland as well is he won't be playing midweek because the game against Arsenal is off. So he will have that time as well between game week 11 and game week 13 for a bit of time off as well. Southampton are the next ones on the cards. Any kind of news there?
Yeah, not a great deal. I did have Musa Janetbo coming into the starting 11 initially, but unfortunately he's out now due to illness. So Stuart Armstrong keeps his place on the right. Elsewhere, not much change in really are Southampton assets attracting much attention? Probably not.
Now, the big one, well, one of the big ones at the moment is Spurs. A lot of people are looking them, especially with the kind of blank next game week as well. Maybe Harry Kane or other people are being looked at as potential captains. But let's have a look at the team. You haven't got Kulusevski in. That's one name that we've been learning to say as well, Ben. You still got Richarlison in the 11.
Yeah. Well, the Kulusevski. Yeah, you like that, Kulusevski. He has been spotted on the training pitches this week, but it's a little bit too soon, so he won't be involved. There were question marks over Richarlison. He took a whack on the knee against Frankfurt. He's been cleared, so he's absolutely fine. We're expecting Antonio Conte to name more or less the same squad as he did midweek. Now, in terms of how maybe he lines up on the flanks or certainly within defence. We've got Ben Davies, but Clement Lenglet, that's, they could be swapped over either this game or midweek. We know Antonio Conte is a big fan of Sessegnon. So if he wanted to play Sessegnon on the left and swap Perisic over to the right, he could do that because we know Matt Doherty, again, is just playing himself up to speed following that injury. He's still feeling the after effects of that MCL problem that curtailed his season last year. Emerson Royale, he's still serving that 3-match ban following his dismissal in the North London derby.
And Chris Naz has said X-Mins for Doherty. Will he see out the 90 or will he get the clean sheet points on 60 mins?
Look, I'm always fairly confident that if a player hasn't picked up a knock, they're going to be looking to go between that 60 to 65, 60 to 70 minute mark. But, that next game week 12, will definitely be a consideration for Antonio Conte Given the fact that Matt Doherty has had those problems, and it wasn't so long ago that he was even questioning the fullbacks, match fitness, and he still wasn't there. So he's getting better, but I wouldn't say he's at optimum levels just yet.
Do you want to say Kulusevski's name again?
Kulusevski.
Move it on to West Ham, a team that you think they're going to do well over the next coming game weeks. The likes of Bowen, Scamacca. Got to say the names right. Don't want anybody to go after us, Ben. Any big injury news here, because the team have had an upward trend in form in recent game weeks.
They have. It's either feast or famine with David Moyes. Some weeks he's just very, very coy, keeps his cards close to his chest, decides to tell you nothing. And then on others, he blurts out a list of names, and we're not sure, where exactly we are. What we do know, Craig Dawson, he went into last night's game in the Europa Conference League with a dead leg against Anderlecht, came on for the injured Angelo Ogbonna hamstring, and then was forced off again. Now, initially post-match, David Moyes played that down, just said it was a precautionary measure. When we heard from him on Friday, he said, look, it's too soon. He's still being evaluated. I do have him in there. It's an impact injury, so that gives us hope. Kira at right back, he's been preferred to Soufal in recent games, missed out against Anderlecht as a precaution. That was a slight knock. Elsewhere within the team, Mikel Antonio carrying a little bit of a cold, but should be okay. And also Kurt Zouma. David Moyes said he was suffering from the sniffles. So again, presumably that's a little bit of cold. But, so not necessarily big players in terms of individuals from an FPL perspective. However, if one or two of those players out that backline miss out, and like I say, we have Ogbonna already sidelined, then that could change the setup of that West Ham team, and that may impact on other players that we maybe, fancy to have within our side.
So I think the final team for this game week is Wolves. Again, another team we're not too interested in, but I think some people have some of their assets. Latest news on them?
Ruben Neves comes back after serving a one-match ban. He'll be a big boost. I have Adama Traore on the right-hand side, in for the injured Pedro Neto. Diego Costa leading that attack. Raul Jimenez, we know, is injured. Diego Costa still getting up to speed. Still question marks for me on how far he is away from getting full match fitness, and also, can we expect to see that player that maybe graced the Premier League with Chelsea? For Wolves, I have me doubts. They're without a permanent manager at the moment, heavily linked with bringing Nuno Espirito Santo back to the club. I think it's 17 months since he was dismissed. I wasn't a fan then, and I certainly wouldn't be a fan now. I think that would be a disappointing move, although I certainly agree with the sacking of Bruno Lage.
Yeah, certainly. Bruno Lage, the football was really bad. But it'd be interesting if we see Nuno Espirito Santo back. We're just about to wrap up. If anybody has any last-minute questions, Ben, to you, Marwan has asked, start Mitrovic or Rodrigo?
Rodrigo, absolutely. Like I say, even if Mitro is past fit, I'd question where he is in terms of his sharpness and his minutes. I would expect to be managed. So for me, Rodrigo gets the nod.
Lovely. Well, I think that's it then. I'll put it out to everybody. Questions are ended. The session is ending, but it's been a pleasure as always. We're here each week just before deadline to answer your questions. So make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss out. Leave a like, share with friends as well so that they're up to date with the FPL injury news. But for now, we're going to say a good week for you in FPL and a good weekend for everybody. And remember,